Okay, so in class the other day, I promised I would put a couple tutorials up. Sorry, it's taking me a little bit of time, but here you go. So I want to do two things with these tutorials. The first one is really going to be about what I covered in class, and I apologize that it was so quick, and I'll probably add a few other things in here that might be helpful, or at least I want to make sure that you kind of have the big picture of how things work in InDesign. But basically, what I want to talk about here with two tutorials is first, what is InDesign? How does it work? What are the pieces you need to understand? What are the components and the commands and the tools that you'll use to basically take you from this to this, okay? So the first part of that is really just understanding what InDesign is and does and how you use it, where you find the tools, how you set things up so that it works efficiently and effectively. The second part of that is how do you go from this to this is really about what your message is, what your content is, and how you lay that content out based on, if you recall, in the lecture we talked about these 6 key composition and layout principles. So balance, proximity and grouping, alignment, repetition, contrast, and white space. So in the second tutorial, I will kind of walk you through the process of how I came up with the designs for these couple pages here. And again, it's iterative. You won't get it right the first time, but there's some things to think about. And of course, we're going to use our friend the grid, which we'll set up with guides in InDesign. And then it allows us to have the freedom to come up with several different alternatives very quickly. And again, well, I made them, so of course I'd like them. But I think these layouts look pretty good, work pretty well. But there's an infinite number of layouts on this page that would work well and look great. And so anyway, that's one of the two things I want to go through. So this first one is really going to be talking about the technical aspects of InDesign. And the second one will be, I will walk you through the process of actually formatting the pages. So the first one will get up to the point of creating the master pages, creating the layers, show you how to put some of those basic things that I went over in class the other day, how to get the header and the footer information in on the master page, add graphics and so forth. And then the second tutorial we'll talk about, and I'll walk through this process of how I came up with this design. Okay, so let's start with the process of creating that first blank document like this. Now I'm not going to use this one because it's already got some of those decisions made. So let's go to the File menu, choose New Document, and several settings. If you remember from class, we're going to leave it set on Print. Number of pages 1. Again, you can put in as many pages as you want, but we can also add those later. So if you don't know how long it's going to be, don't worry about it. Just leave that set at 1. We're going to choose this page size tabloid. And over here in orientation, we want it to be landscape. Our two choices, portrait or vertical, or landscape horizontal. So we're going to choose that. And because I have the preview option checked, you can see that as I make my choices, I can see the page in the background, which actually is really helpful. So you might want to do that. Also, InDesign can handle lots of different units. Picas and points are units that graphic designers have used traditionally to lay out pages. And if you are a professional graphic designer, you probably work in these because you see them just like you and I see inches. I don't think in picas and points. So we can go in and change the units later to inches, which I probably will do in the second tutorial. However, in this one, we don't have to worry about it because InDesign understands how to translate between those. So I'm going to put in 17 inches. Important that you add that unit measurement in there. So that's 102 picas, and 11 inches. And that's 66 picas. So we've got a tabloid size page, 11 by 17. We're going to leave this set at the default because we're going to create our own custom grid using guides to help us decide where the columns and gutters should go. Now down here, I do want to add some margins. By default, you can see behind here that looks like it's about a ½ inch, and I think that's what 3 picas are. Let's find out. 0.5 inches. Yeah, so it gives you a basic ½ inch border. Why do you have borders on pages? Well, it gets back to one of those principles of white space. It allows you to create a frame that the page content sits within, but also most printers can't print right to the edge of the page because they have little rollers that feed the paper through and all that stuff. So margins are not just good for visual reasons, they are also important for functional reasons of allowing printers to do what they do. And there are printers that can do full bleed printing, even cheap, homeowner models. And a lot of times, if you're going to go to a full bleed type of print for a poster or some other page like that, and you've certainly seen that in magazines, pictures go right to the edge of the page. But a lot of times that's done on a larger sheet of paper, and then it's trimmed to make that work, because it just, printers work easier and they're cheaper to make when they can grab the paper from the edges. Okay, so we're going to use that margin. That's why it comes up by default, but we also want to create margins that work for us visually. And in this case, because we have this option for facing pages, because we're making a book or a report, the insides of those pages, the margin there needs to be bigger than the outside, because that's where you bind it. So whether you staple it, whether you punch it and put a spiral binding on it, however you do that, and anything that you're binding multiple pages, whether it's a book, whether it's a magazine, whether it's a set of drawings, you always put that margin a little bit thicker on the binding edge, because if it takes a 1/4 inch to bind it, you still want that extra 1/2 inch margin to be inside of that. Otherwise, you end up with a really tiny margin on the binding side. So because of that, if we want 1/2 inch all the way around on the bottom, well, let's say on the inside, we're going to set that to 0.75 inches to give us that extra bit of space. And you can see it just added it over here. So as it flips the pages back and forth from right to left, it will always add that on the inside. That's why this doesn't say right, left, top, bottom. It says top, bottom, inside, and outside, because it varies depending on whether you have the right page or the left page. And then we're also going to add a 0.75 to the bottom. Now I chose that again. These aren't absolute measurements. It's just, I'm going to put footer information down here, which will be my name, your name, the course name, semester. We're going to put the page number field down here, so automatically create page numbers as we add to this book that we're going to produce at the end of project 1. So I just wanted a little extra space. I guess I could put that inside the page, but I think it looks a little bit better to say that that's not information that's the same on every page. So you don't want it within the boundaries of the page itself, within the margins. You want that outside the margins, just like in every book that you read. Okay, so I think I have everything done. I'm not worried about bleed and slug for this. And I'm going to click OK. So there we go. And if I zoom out, you can see that page. Now, one of the things when you're working with InDesign, I know you guys learned this before, but InDesign is a desktop publishing program. It's designed to lay out single pages for brochures or posters. You can do booklets, you can do books, you can do volumes actually, and put several books into a volume set. And the reason for that is because it allows you to have consistent formatting, whether it's for 1 page, 4 pages, or 300 pages or 10,000 pages. So it gives you lots of options when you think about, a set of encyclopedias, which maybe you guys never looked at, I don't know. But okay, let's use Harry Potter. If you got the whole set of Harry Potter books, that makes up a volume of individual books, and each book has different images and text, but they're all formatted exactly the same. They all have the same size, so when you put them on your bookshelf, they all line up, everything looks great. And so InDesign gives you the ability to do that, but it can actually produce things other than printed text. You can do print text, you can do online, you can create ebooks from InDesign. You can actually create interactive PDFs that have links and hyperlinks and cross-reference links and all that kind of stuff. And over the years, or maybe this summer after the semester's over, if you really want to get more into InDesign, you can go to lynda.psu.edu. That's lynda.psu.edu. If you have a Penn State user ID, you can get into that for free. It's a subscription service that has tutorials for thousands of different software packages. And they're really good, and they're all by different authors, but there's a really good consistency between the different tutorials that are online. They kind of control that and do the quality assurance no matter who's creating the original tutorials. And they also have not just a what this is basically, a screen movie, screencast with someone's voice. They also supply you with sample files that you can download and use to work through the projects that they're presenting in the tutorial. And they have written text that you can see scrolling through. So if you want the transcript for what's going on, you can see that as well. So lynda.com, well, lynda.psu.edu is really an amazing resource, and it doesn't matter what software you're using. If you want to learn something about it, check out lynda.com and see what they have. Okay, so that's what InDesign is. It comes from this heritage of the days where you laid out books and publications on the desktop, a real, wooden desktop or Formica desktop, and you lay those things out, and then you took photographs of them, and then you took them to press, and you created originals and printed those things out. So one of the things I mentioned in class, we'll be talking more about this next year in 251, but there's basically two categories of software for designers: raster and vector. Raster means the images are made up of a matrix of pixels, which stands for picture elements, and that's something like Photoshop. Every image has a fixed resolution and size, whatever the row and columns are, and the density of those rows and columns determine how high resolution the image is. Something like AutoCAD or SketchUp or Rhino or Illustrator, they're vector-based. So everything is based on geometry of lines and geometric shapes. In a vector-based application, you can scale things infinitely because a line is simply a definition of here's the location of point 1, here's the location of point 2. There's a line that connects them. It has this characteristics: line, weight, color, etc. In Photoshop, that line is defined by a diagonal row of pixels, for example, and those pixels have a certain size and they have a certain color assigned to them. So InDesign is not really either of those things. It's a program because in desktop publishing you use text, you use graphics, you use images. I like to think of InDesign as a program that has containers, and we'll talk about that as we go through this. It allows you to put anything in there, and the nice thing is in Photoshop, if you have white space, that takes up just as much memory and disk storage as red or green or blue. In InDesign, the white space doesn't take up anything. It's just a canvas that you put things on. So you really don't ever want to use Photoshop to create a 2-foot by 3-foot poster because it creates an enormous file size. Even if you have a lot of white space in it, it still takes up the same amount of storage requirements. Whereas in InDesign, if you have white space, that doesn't count. So wherever you have pictures and images and text and graphics, yeah, that adds to the size of the file and so forth, but the white space doesn't. So and you might also ask, what's the difference between InDesign and Illustrator? Well, InDesign has some very basic tools for creating graphic content: lines, squares, circles. You can fill them, you can use gradients, that kind of thing. But beyond that, it doesn't really have much of a tool set for actually creating original content. It assumes, excuse me, that you're going to get the content by using Photoshop, by using AutoCAD, SketchUp, Rhino, Illustrator, whatever it is. So Illustrator is a vector-based graphics program. Now it does create pages. You can create multiple pages. It has layers. It has a lot of the same similarities, but it has way more tools for actually creating graphic content. So you can create vector-based graphics that are infinitely scalable. So that's why a lot of graphic designers that create posters and things like that that might be reproduced at a variety of scales use Illustrator. So you could, if you're doing a multiple page report, you wouldn't want to use Illustrator. It's not really, that's not its primary focus. If you're doing a board layout or a poster or a flyer, you could use Illustrator or you could use InDesign. But you wouldn't want to use Photoshop. You create the raster graphics and adjust them in Photoshop, bring them into InDesign or bring them into Illustrator and add to that. So anyway, I just want you to be clear that if you're creating single page posters for your design studios later, you could use Illustrator, you could use InDesign. I tend to use InDesign. Most of my project statements, actually the ones we're using in this class, that's not true of, but a lot of the ones you'll see in 251, they're all laid out in InDesign. because it allows me to adjust the text and the graphics, bring in images, and so forth. Okay, so that's that's the basic difference between those things. And I think with that, let's just get started with we've created this new document. Let's set up the pieces that we need. And that really focuses on two things: page master templates and layers. That's kind of the core of setting up the structure of what you're doing. Once you've got that set up, we'll talk about these tools over here, which I know you're already familiar with to a certain extent. And in the second tutorial, I'll get into that a little bit more. But let's just get the basics set up here. So if you're not sure how to do this, this will be a good review for you. So we have a single page. We set up the basic margins and layout. We know it's facing pages. So the order that you do this really isn't significant. However, since I'm going to be creating a certain amount of content, and because I want to think about this in terms of pre-planning, I want to set up some layers. So if I go back to my original here, my completed one, you can see I have the grid, footer info, images, graphics, body text, and header info. So I may have to refer back to this because I can't remember that many things at one time. So, and I'll talk about this as we go through it. So let's do grid, footer, images. So we'll just go to the layers. I have one here, so I'm just going to double click on that and name that grid. And again, I'm thinking the layers do have a stacking order, so I just clicked on the create new layer icon down here. And since I'm thinking about this mainly as a vertical stacking like in Photoshop, what's below is on the bottom, what's above is on the top, but there's also other stacking within layers in terms of what you can bring forward or send backward. But I'm also thinking about this in terms of what's within the margins, the real content of the page, and what's outside the margins or part of the header and the footer information. That kind of part of that remains continuous on every page. Part of it that gets changed. So I'm going to make my next layer footer info. So that will be down here at the bottom and include my name and the course number and the page numbers. And you also notice as I create these, it creates a new color for each one. So let's go this, and I don't remember what that was, like I said. Okay, images, graphics, body text. Got it. Okay, so this will be images. And the reason I do this is there's times where you're manipulating one part of the page layout or another, one part of the content, and you don't want to accidentally click on something and move it around, or maybe you have overlapping elements and at some point you can't see things. By separating these things out, you can hide and show them at different times, so you can just turn all the images off so you can focus on the text, or you can also, as I said, affect the stacking order as to what's in front or behind. You can also lock these layers so that when I'm trying to manipulate some of the graphics, I don't accidentally click on the images and move them or scale them in some way. Okay, so there's lots of good reasons to keep yourself organized this way. Make another one, and I think that one is body text. And this one will be graphics. And again, what I'm doing is making a distinction between images or sketches. Okay, so under images, that includes your drawings. Photographs or drawings. Graphics really are like leader lines, extra boxes. Okay, over here I've got this little line. Let's get rid of this for a second. I've got a line here to separate the header. I've got a little box with different fills here as kind of a graphic accent. Those things would be on the graphics layer. And if I turn these off and on, well, all those aren't going off because at this point I decided this is part of the header. So you can see the header information all gets turned off and on at one time. So if I want to see what's exactly in the page, what isn't, I can click on these two things and you can see that's page information, that's footer, that's header information. And it looks like I maybe got these out of order on the other page, which is good because I'll show you how to deal with that. So let's make one more. Call that header info. Okay. And I think, what did I have here? Oh yeah, I had graphics below. Doesn't really matter, I don't think, except I kind of, yeah, sometimes the graphics may be over this, but if you need to move the order of these layers, just click on one and drag it up there. So now we have graphics and body text. If you want to hide or show a layer, as I just demonstrated, you just click on the little eyeball icon. And if you want to lock a layer, you click in that column next to it, and that will lock it so you can't move it or change it or edit it in any way. Okay, so sometimes hiding is good enough. Sometimes you need to see it, but you don't want to accidentally manipulate it. So in that case, locking is a better option. All right, so we've got our layers set up. And again, you could create the content, and then once you get all arranged on the page, you could go through and change it to different layers. And as you know from last semester, you don't have to make layers to be able to create a layout on a page either. But it does give you a little more flexibility and a little more control when you want to edit things later. Okay, so we've got our layers set up. We're going to close that. Now let's go to pages. And as I mentioned, one of the things in InDesign, just like Microsoft Word uses what's called the normal template, there are templates in Microsoft Word, and you can create templates for business letters, for resumes, for reports, for whatever you want. And if you're going to create one of those type of documents, you just open a document, apply that template to it, and all the styles and the formatting and everything is right there for you to start using. And that's the beauty of using a template or a master page as an InDesign. Because we're going to create multiple pages, things like the page number, your name, the project number, the course name, those things are going to be the same on every page, although the page numbers will be sequential. So instead of copying and then pasting them on every page, which is a lot of extra work, and then, oh, wait, if you change the pages, you delete a page, then you have to go back and change every single page number. Okay, you don't want to do that. That's why they have a field, a placeholder text that you put in that automatically generates the page number. And that's also, even if you had that in on individual pages, you'd have to keep inserting it. And you don't want to have to do that every time. That's just extra work. If we put it on the master page, it always occurs in the same place on every page. And you'll notice there's a none. So later on, we deal with the title page and the blank page on the back of the title. We can apply this none template. So it just gets rid of all the things that we don't really want on those special pages. Or if you had section titles in between each set of elements that we're giving you, compositional elements, you could create a separate master page for that and apply it to those pages so that you get a different setup, because it's not the same body text and everything else. It's going to be different. So let's start by, because we have facing pages, we have an A master, but it has a left and a right. So it's the same master page, but it has those two variations. So right now we're actually looking at the page itself. That's what this icon represents. If we want to go to the master page, so when we set up our grid, which we'll do in a second, we don't want to do it on the page. We want to do it on the master page, because then that grid occurs everywhere. Otherwise, we have to create it again and again and again and again. Unless you have a lot of time that you can afford to waste, let's just double click on the master pages. And now you can see we've got the left and the right. And if we look in our pages panel, you can see that's what's highlighted. That's where we're working right now. So you need to pay attention to that. Okay, so let's set up our custom guides, and then we'll add the header and footer info, maybe that basic graphic line, and then we'll go from there. And I'll probably end this tutorial when we get to that point, and then start the other tutorial where we actually go through and start adding some content. All right, so how do we do guides? That would be under Layout and Create Guides. So this is our basic dialog here. As I said, you can change this anytime you want to, because you can always click on this and say remove existing ruler guides and just replace. When I did this the first time, I used 6 rows and 12 columns. I did a layout, basically looks the same as what we have here, but it was slightly, I had to move several things off the grid in order to make it work well. So what I did was, thanks to Professor Yonner's advice, I went back and I changed that grid from 6 and 12 to 6 and 10. So since I know that worked well, again, you're never going to get this perfect first time, but once you do a few of these, you'll kind of get an idea how grids for certain proportions for certain size pages work. But I'm going to go with 6 rows. Again, if we have preview checked, you can see visually. And then another important thing, I think by default it sets on page. Now we don't want these running to the pages, because again, our content is going to be within the margins. So make sure you choose fit guides to margins. And here I'm going to click on this and let's take it up to 10. And then the other thing I did on my first try in this, I used a 1/8 inch gutter, and the gutter is this space between the grids. You could create a 0 gutter and just create a grid like graph paper, but that doesn't really work very well because we don't want a picture up against the grid and then text right up against the picture, right? We need a little white space between those. That's our last important principle. We need white space in order to make it visually understandable. So I decided on the second version to go with 0.25 or a 1/4 inch gutter and 0.25 inch for that one. So that gives me enough space. And again, that 0.25 is not an absolute. It's going to vary. If you're doing a poster, you might want bigger gutters because you're doing a 2 foot by 3 foot page. This is 11 by 17. You don't want giant spaces between things or it won't appear to be grouped together. Another one of our important principles. So little trial and error there, but generally speaking, for the printed page at 8.5 by 11 or 11 by 17, in that range, you're going to be between 1/8 inch and 1/4 inch in terms of the gutters that you want to set up. Okay, so I just placed these in here, and since I was, talking too much and not really paying attention, I didn't really see what I put that on header info. Okay, so that's not really where I want it, right? I've got my grid layer. So let's look at that. Go back here. Let's see if I can do this. I think I can do it with the grids. So if I draw across here and select everything and just click on that button, that little color button there, I just drag it down there, and now the grid is on my grid layer. Okay, so if you need to move something to layer, you select it. This shows you what layer it's on. If you drag that up to images, now and you'll notice that whatever the color key is for the layer, the object border, or in this case the object itself, because it's a grid, gets shifted to that. But again, I'm going to click, drag, drop, and there it is. So now it's on my master page and it's on the right layer. So I can control it and turn it off and on whenever I want to, which I can do by the layer, or I can also use the W keyboard shortcut. That turns that off and on, just gives you the, and basically what that's doing is switching between normal view and preview mode. Okay, normal, preview. Normal shows all the edges of the containers, the grid, any other guides or ruler information that's there. It allows you to see it. Preview is, this is what it's going to look like when you print it. Okay, so it's actually very helpful to toggle back and forth. When you're here, this helps me to lay things out, but once it's laid out, the grid becomes distracting. So I want to see it without that grid and actually make a visual judgment as to, is this working okay or not? Okay, so that's why we're going to go back and forth between those modes. Okay, so we've got the grid set up now, and I'm going to zoom in on one of the pages here. Start with the left one. Again, I'm still in my master pages, which is what I want, and now I am going to go to footer info, and I'm going to create a text field. So I'm just going to click on the text tool, just going to, I don't really know where this is going to go for now, so I'm just going to click and drag from there to there. And I'm going to type some information. So I'm going to type my name, few spaces, a vertical bar, which is the shift key and the backslash, few spaces, and landscape architecture, 112. Space, 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 shift backslash 3 spaces, spring 2016. Now, I haven't spent a lot of time talking about fonts, but I would suggest that you just go with a basic sans serif font. So in this case, I'm just going to go with tried and true Arial, and I can click on this and just say regular. And 12 point, I might make that a little smaller, maybe 11 point. Supposedly research has shown that's the easiest point size text to read, but usually body text is between 10 and 12 points. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to move this down a little bit off that line because I know I could have an image or a content going right to that, and I don't want to have it sitting right on the edge. So I moved it down a little bit to give myself some space if in case that occurs. I'm also going to select all this, which you can just click in there, do Control A, it selects everything. And I'm going to go up to the top here and choose Right Justified. And I'm just doing that because I want that to be sitting right on my margin. And since I need one on the other page, I'm going to select that. Use the, again, I know you guys probably know this. This is the selection tool. This is the direct selection tool. And once I get into the second tutorial, we'll talk more about how those things work. But this, I can just hold the Alt key down, click, hit the Shift key right away, and drag until I snap this edge of that field right to the margin there. I'm going to double click to get into it, Control A for all, select all, and I'm going to move over to the left margin. So on the left page, it's justified to the right. On the right page, it's justified to the left. Okay, then the other footer information I'm going to do, I'm actually just going to copy this, Alt, click Shift, drag, and in here, I'm just going to do select all, and I'm going to type page, 3 spaces, 3 spaces, and you wouldn't have to put page in there, you could just put the number, and then I'm going to insert a special character. So I go insert special character, markers, current page number. So in Word, they call that a field code. In here, again, because this is going to be on the left page, I'm going to justify that out there. And you notice it says page A. The reason it says page A because we're on A, the master page called A. And once you go back to this mode, if I click here, now you'll see this happens to be the left page, and it doesn't have a page number yet, but we'll look at that in a second. So let's go back here, take this field, Alt, click Shift, drag it over here, hold it right at the edge there. Okay, there's there. Double click, select all, right justify. Okay, now if I go back to this page, you can see that that's page 1. Okay, hit W, you can see what that is going to look like there. And now, well, let's work on the header first, and then we'll add some pages. You'll see how that populates its way out. Okay, so let's go back here, hit W, turn our grids back on. So one of the things I did here was let's add another text field starting right here. I'm just going to drag it out kind of far, and this is going to be, well, tell you what, since I don't have this memorized, I'm going to go to my header page. And this is going to be project 1 and the title of it. So again, this actually illustrates another principle. It's one of the things I sent out in the other email. If you do a layout, at least 2 layouts that are complete for this first set of elements, compositional elements or components, you still need to get all your information better together for the other one. So if you have all this stuff typed up in Microsoft Word, then you can have Word open and you can just copy and paste back and forth between. You know, it's actually more efficient and better to do it that way. You can edit text and do all kinds of things with it in InDesign, but it's not Microsoft Word. Microsoft Word is designed to be a word processor, okay? That's what it does. Use the right tool for the right job, and then you just copy and paste, you set up the format, boom, it's done. You don't have to sit here and type everything in because you already got it in one repository. You copy and paste it. You don't have to worry about typos. Everything is fixed. You check the content. You check what you've written, edit it, make sure it's all good. And then when you get to InDesign, all you're doing is dropping things into containers and worrying about the visual layout. You shouldn't be thinking about content generation when you get to this point. You should already have that figured out. This is simply composing it together on a page. Okay, so we've got that lined up. And we can do the same thing over here. Select it, Alt, click Shift. And in this case, click Shift right with that guide right there. So now if we go back to our pages, W, Okay, you can see that that's coming across there. So those are basically the pieces. Well, I think I have one other piece, right? What do we have here? I've got this line, and whether you add these graphics or not, but let's just take that line, for example. That's also going to go in here. Now, in this case, I actually put the line kind of halfway between. So I'm going to click, hold the shift key down and drag it, snap it to that edge there. And I have a 1-point line, and it's solid black. Okay. You can see here that that's what's going on. So again, go to this page, W, now you can see that. So all that stuff is on footer info, right? No, that's not the footer, right? Okay, so let's go back to our pages. And where did I just draw that? Just drew that in the wrong place, right? Because when I went to that page, it disappeared. So I forgot to set back. So in this case, I'm going to do select it, cut it. I'm going to go here and then not just paste, but paste special or paste into place. It's going to put it back in exactly the same place. And then I'm going to select this and this, go to my layers and say, no, that doesn't belong in the footer. That belongs in the header. I'm just going to drag it up there, and you can see now that I can turn that off and on. And now I can go to here, put that up in header info, leave that selected, active. Turn my grid on. I'm just going to select that. Same thing, Alt, click, Shift, drag over, and snap this to the edge there. So if I hit W, zoom out a bit, I'm using the space bar to get the hand tool to move around. So there's all the information we're putting on the header and the footer for right now. I've got a graphic line, I've got the project name, I've got my name and the course information and the page numbers. So that's kind of the process. Whether you're doing if you're doing multiple pages, this is kind of important to set up. If you're doing a single poster, a master page really isn't important, right? Because everything's going to be on one page and that's going to be it. So you don't have to do this. Layers, however, still really important. You shouldn't use any kind of graphic design software without using layers. I don't care if it's InDesign, Illustrator, AutoCAD, Photoshop, SketchUp, Rhino, the list goes on. You always use layers. That's the only way to use any of this software. Otherwise, you're going to have trouble later on if you change your mind. There's not one way to do things in the design world. So make sure you set yourself up for maximum flexibility, because I'll guarantee you if you get your first internship and you'll do a project, the boss isn't going to come in and say, that's absolutely perfect the way it is. Nope, they're going to say, no, that's not bad, but this needs to go here. You need to move this here. I want to change this. And so the better you are at setting up a document with master pages, with templates, with styles, you can go through and make those changes really quickly. So make sure you always use layers, no matter what piece of software you're using. All right, so I think I'll stop now with this tutorial, and then I'll set up the other one where we'll actually start putting these things in when we go from one place to the other. And let's go back to our pages here so you can actually see, kind of walk through the process with me about how I put this stuff in, how I organize these. We'll talk about links to the graphics, and I didn't really get a chance to go through that in class on Friday.